Thank you so much. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin in earnest. The session is being recorded, and so if there's any reason you have to drop out of the meeting, we will be posting uh, the meeting on YouTube, so you can look back in and see what all you might have missed. Um, we have everybody muted, and we please ask that everybody, other than our panelists, who I'll introduce in a moment, stay on mute. We had a bunch of questions submitted in the RSVP form, and so we'll try to get to as many of those as possible. If you have any questions that arise during our discussion, please go ahead and put those in chat, and we will get to as many of those as we possibly can. So a little bit about GVPedia before we begin. GVPedia is a comprehensive resource that features our study database, which is the largest publicly available in existence with more than 1,000 studies on gun violence matters. And we also have GVP University, which hosts white papers, fact sheets, and some of our original research. And then we also have our Facts About Firearms Policy Initiative, which is a collection of short fact sheets and white papers debunking a number of common myths. And particularly pertinent to this conversation today, in 2019, we helped compile the Denver Accord, which is a comprehensive roadmap to reducing gun violence. So without further ado, I'd like to briefly introduce our panelists today, who I'm very excited we got here, and then we can get right into the conversation. So joining us, we have Dr. Cassandra Kerfasi, who is an assistant professor at Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. She has published a massive number of studies on gun violence on topics ranging from permit to purchase, child access prevention laws, and she also has some new polling data that I'd like to get into that I think we'll find incredibly interesting. We're also joined by James Timpson, the Director for Community Partnership and Safety for ROCA Maryland and the ROCA Impact Institute. And he helps at-risk youths in Baltimore, and his work is incredible, and can't wait to introduce him further and have him talk about his work. And finally, but definitely not least, we have Poe Murray, who's the chair of Newtown Action Alliance, who's an incredible advocate and a great voice speaking for the grassroots of the gun violence prevention movement. And she's also a board member of GVPedia, which we're incredibly fortunate to have her. So, Dr. Kerfasi, I'd like to start with you. We had a number of questions come in about permit to purchase laws. And so I'd like you to take a moment to explain what exactly are permit to purchase laws, what makes them different from standard universal background checks, and what does the most recent data show about these laws, including if you could perhaps share some of the polling data around various laws, including permit to purchase.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. So one of the key things we think about when we are talking about background check systems are sort of some of the gaps or weaknesses, right? So we all know, I'm sure, that federal law doesn't require private sellers to conduct background checks. That's only required of federally licensed dealers. Some states have said all sellers, including private sellers, have to conduct a background check. But there's a lot of variation in how that is sort of implemented. And where permit to purchase laws come in is it creates a system that can increase accountability with compliance for background checks. So when someone is in a state that has a permit to purchase, sometimes it's referred to as a handgun purchaser license, this individual, before they even walk into a gun store, applies for a permit to purchase, either with state or local law enforcement. There's a background check that's conducted both using the federal system, but also recognizing weaknesses in the federal system with delays in reporting or just not reporting at all. The state will also conduct a check of their own local records, state and local records, to make sure someone is not prohibited. Rather than only allowing 3 days for a background check, law enforcement has up to 30 days. It doesn't always take that long, but sometimes more time is needed to make sure that we're not giving guns to people who shouldn't have them. And then once they have the license, they have to show it to any purchaser. And I like to draw the analogy of sort of a driver's license and a car dealership. You don't walk into a car dealership and they assess whether you can buy, whether you can lawfully drive, right? You have to have a driver's license before you can test drive a car, before you can drive it off the lot. So this puts a similar process in place where you can only sell to someone with a valid license, which makes it easier to comply with some of the private sale background check laws. When it comes to impact, we've seen numerous public safety benefits. We see fewer guns in states that have these licensing laws being recovered in crimes in those states. So more guns that are recovered in crime in states with licensing laws are coming from other states. Like in Maryland, a lot of our guns have been coming from Tennessee, West Virginia, Virginia before they had some stronger laws in place. So we see a constraint being put on some of the local sources of guns. We also see lower rates of firearm homicide, including mass shootings, fatal mass shootings, and lower rates of suicide. We have some new work that we're getting ready to publish right now that also shows reductions in police-involved shootings when states have these licensing laws in place. There's a lot of talk about very broad public support for background checks, which is important. And I want to just say I'm in no way saying we shouldn't have background checks, that we should only have licensing, because licensing doesn't work if you don't have these comprehensive background checks, right? Those are the floor that we need all these other gun laws to build up off of. But we also see really broad support for licensing laws. So we see more than 70% of US adults, including more than 60% of gun owners, saying that they would support being required to have a licensing system put in place. And the last thing I'll say is that if you look at gun owners who live in states that already have these laws in place, so gun owners who presumably have some experience with the system, their support for these laws is actually 75%. So it's higher than what we see overall. Sort of demystifying the process, I think, is really important when we're thinking about moving these policies forward.
Thank you so much. So we have permit to purchase on kind of the state and even national level, hopefully the national level at some point. But we also have a variety of programs at the local and even street level that are quite critical to reducing gun violence. And so, James, could you tell us a little bit about your program, which is a community-based change operates off the community-based change behavioral change model, I believe. I apologize if I misstated that. So what does your organization do? How does it fit in with other community level programs and also law enforcement, state laws, and so forth?
Yeah, so good afternoon, everybody. We are a behavior change model, but we're part of the violence prevention ecosystem, which includes hospital-based prevention programs. It also includes violence interruption / intervention programs. And then you have your behavioral change models, which we are. But within our model, we touch on a little bit of all the other two pieces as well, because we are a complete wraparound model. So ROCA, we service high-risk young people ages 16 to 24 years old. In Baltimore, we specifically service young men only right now, because in Baltimore, it's a new program. So we're only 3 years up and running here in Baltimore. It's a 4-year model. So we're still in our first cohort of young men here in Baltimore. Right now, we're servicing about 200 plus young men that are deemed high risk in the city, again, between the ages of 16 to 24. And the way that we do that is we believe that, we have to meet these young people where they are. And so the way that we recruit our young people is very, very relentless. We are known for our relentless nature in which we find our young people. We get our young people. So I'll make a little connection here, a little linkage here between us and law enforcement right to begin, and other criminal justice partners or agencies that we work with. Our 3 referring partners are the Baltimore City Police Department, the Division of Parole and Probation, and the Department of Juvenile Services. Those are the 3 main referral sources. Why? Because they are the ones who have the most contact with the highest risk young people. So we know that we should be working with those partners to be able to service these young people who are at the highest risk. And when I say highest risk, what I mean is that these are young people that are at the highest risk of becoming your next victims or perpetrators of gun violence, just based on their criminal involvement. And so the relentless nature in which we pursue them, because most of the time, all the referral gives us is a name and an address. Sometimes we may have a phone number, most of the time we don't. So we go knock on the door. In Baltimore, it takes us an average of 15 to 18 door knocks before we make contact with a young person. But during those 15 to 18 door knocks, guess what's happening? We're already starting to build relationships with the family who continues to answer that door and wants to know, why the heck do you keep coming back and knocking on my door all these times, right? But it's the way that we have to be in order to connect with these young people. If they were sitting at home waiting for us to come, then they probably wouldn't be high risk, right? They're out in the streets, they're running the streets, they're involved in a lot of criminal behavior. And the way that we recruit is to disrupt it. You know, we disrupt it. We go right in the belly. So if you tell me a young person is in the back alley selling drugs, then guess what? I'm going to find them. I'm going to go in the back alley and be like, hey, boy, let me holler at you for a minute. You know, and it's a way that we do it and the way that we go about it and the approach that we use that makes it successful, believe it or not. Because I will tell you, when Roka first came 3 years ago and they told me that part of it was to go knock on people's doors who didn't know you were coming, I said, oh, no, not in Baltimore. That won't work. But to be honest, it has been one of the things that has gotten us in the door the most, right? Is the relentless nature. The second piece is really about transformational relationships. We believe that young people change in the context of relationships, and our relationships with our young people have to be strong enough to really challenge them on their negative behavior, to challenge them on the criminal involvement. And we do that through what our version of CBT, which is cognitive behavioral theory for us, more widely known as cognitive behavioral therapy, which has to be conducted by licensed clinicians. We created a theory, a cognitive behavioral theory, along with Mass General Hospital's Department of Psychiatry, that can be delivered by frontline staff, that can be delivered by paraprofessionals, that can be delivered formally or informally. So it's highly mobile, and it's designed to be delivered in the field when we meet young people at their front doors, when we're sitting in their living room, when we're talking to them while they're in the middle of doing what they're doing. We're always coming from a CBT lens. CBT, really what we coined it as is 7 skills that really teach young people how to emotionally regulate. And it teaches them how to emotionally regulate long enough to make better decisions. Because if they can learn how to emotionally regulate before they make some of the decisions that they make, then they may find themselves in a different position to be able to make another decision later on in life. A lot of decisions that they make are so emotional and so just spare the moment and rash that it costs them their lives. It costs them their freedom. So we focus on the behavior change, and we know that behavior change is long-term, but we also know that the conditions that got them to where they are, the lifestyle that they live, were also long-term. Nobody became a criminal in 6 months. You know, nobody became a criminal in this short period of time. It's a lifestyle. It's what they have been taught over and over for years as growing up as children. It's what they've seen when they walk out their front door. So we understand that we have to be able to hang in it with them long enough to be able to see some behavior change. And then really quickly, we also have a social enterprise where we teach them how to work. One of the biggest misconceptions is that all these young people need jobs. Well, how do they need jobs if they don't even know how to work? The first thing we have to do is show them how to work before we can get them jobs. Because all that happens is when you give them employment and they're not ready to work, the trauma that they've suffered over their lives, they relive it over and over again. Talk about doors being slammed in their face. They don't understand why their workplace behavior wasn't appropriate. You know, you'll be surprised how many young people just really don't understand how what they did was not appropriate, because it's what they've seen their whole life. So we have to teach them how to show up to work, how to get up in the morning, how to set your alarm clock, how to be in uniform, how to deal with your coworkers, how to deal with your supervisors, how to deal with workplace conflict. All those different types of things we teach them through our social enterprise, where we actually send them out to work. They get paid minimum wage and they work about 30 and a half hours a week. And again, it's a practice ground. It's a practice ground for the CBT. It's a practice ground for them to learn how to work and learn how to show up to work. And then hopefully after about 18 months, of successful engagement in the work program, we can help them find advanced employment opportunities and help them along their trajectory in life. Doesn't always work out that way, but that's how we hope. And then the last piece I'll say is that engage institutions, like the policy work that we do, the work that we do with our local government, state and local, is very critical, because we also have to help government understand why the investment is important, why the investment on the front end is more important than the investment on the back end. Because a lot of time we can save a lot of what we go through on the back end if we learn to address some of these things on the front end. So our program is really designed to not only change behaviors of young people, but it's also designed to change behaviors of policymakers, changes of law enforcement, change behaviors of all different entities that may have some type of effect on the success of our young people. And so working within that ecosystem, it's important for us to be able to have linkages with hospital-based programs and other violence interruption / intervention programs that also do this type of work, because we know that these young people need tons of wraparound services. They need tons of wraparound services. But the one thing that's most important is the holding them accountable. We hold young people accountable for their behaviors and their actions. So we don't condone the negative behavior, but what we do understand is that it's a process to change it. So while we're going through that process with these young people, we're always addressing them and always confronting them about the challenges that keep them stuck where they are. If you say you want to be a good father, how can you be a good father if your line of work may cause you to lose your life or may cause you to be incarcerated? If raising your kids is what you value, then let's show you how to value them a little bit more, or value them in a different way that keeps you out of harm's way as well as keeps your children out of harm's way, right? So we have to understand that in order to change this landscape of violence, we really have to start focusing on the behaviors of these young people, because I know you all see it just like I do nationally about all these stories of these younger people, younger and younger and younger, becoming perpetrators of violence, number one, and not only perpetrators, but now they're starting to become victims of violence, right? You're seeing 12 and 13-year-olds and 14-year-olds getting shot on a more consistent basis than we've ever seen. It's not because they got caught in crossfire. It's because a lot of those bullets were intended for them. And they don't understand the consequences of their actions at that young age. So we really have to help focus on behavior change. And even though we work with 16 to 24, our work and our model is designed really after brain science. And the brain science tells us that there are 3 points in life in which people are most likely to change. That's 0 to 5. That's between the ages of 16 to 24. And that's women after they give birth. So as a young man, you only have 2 opportunities. 0 to 5 and 16 to 24 are your greatest opportunities to experience any type of sustainable behavior change. The 2 major outcomes of our program is some level of sustainable employment for our young people and reduction in recidivism. So again, if we're working with super high-risk young people who are highly criminally involved, most likely victims or perpetrators of next gun violence, it is realistic to think that some will change and be gone in a completely different direction in 4 years, but it's also realistic to understand that some won't and will still engage in criminal behavior. But we hope that the severity or the level of the criminal behavior that they're engaging in lessens over time until they can eventually work their way out of it. The more opportunities we're able to present and the wraparound services we can give them, the more chance we have to really help them change that trajectory. So the gun laws, are extremely important for us, because even on the groundwork, we see what happens when illegal guns come into our community. I was telling my colleagues on our prep call the other day that I can sit in one of my housing projects and I can watch West Virginia tags come out. I can watch Pennsylvania tags come out. I can watch all these tags coming in and out of the projects, and I know what they're doing. They're trading guns for drugs. So these policies and these laws, a lot of times people don't really think about the effects that it has on the frontline work or on the streets. But we are just as passionate about some of these laws and policies being changed as we are about the frontline work we do, because we understand the effects that it has when these guns reach the streets and get into hands of young people. In this city, it's not uncommon for young people to carry guns. people don't understand that carrying a gun is as normal as carrying a pen in your book bag to go to school for some of these young people, for most of my young people, because it's the reality that they have been come to know as normal. And so really with the behavior change, we have to focus a lot on changing abnormal behaviors that our young people have learned to normalize around guns and gun violence.
Thank you so much. So kind of tying everything together from national, state laws and community level programs. What does the national advocacy landscape look like right now? My understanding is that there's the $5 billion investment in community level programs that's working its way through and is still alive. But a lot of other policies and programs don't seem to have much of a chance. So what's it look like at the national level, and trying to move lawmakers towards, like, rather than take like a piecemeal approach, say like, yes, we need this and all these other things that fit together. So is there any hope at the national level? And if so, or if not, what can we do about it? Move advocacy to the state level or community level, or what do we do?
So Devin, those are really great questions. First, it's really great to see many of the familiar faces on Zoom today, and it's nice to meet everyone else. For those of you who don't know me, I got involved in this movement because my neighbor shot 20 children and 6 educators back in 2012, and we felt compelled to take action to create the changes that are necessary to reduce the gun violence epidemic. Sadly, gun deaths and injuries and the number of mass shootings have risen over the years. It's been almost 9 years, and we expected some action. 3 years ago, actually, Devin pulled together a conference in Denver on the 20th anniversary of the Columbine shooting tragedy. And with grassroots groups and survivors and grass tops, we all got together and came up with the Denver Accord, which is a comprehensive solution to end all forms of gun violence in this nation. And that's what's really required. As James said, you have to do the work in the streets, but you also have to pass reform. It's going to be critical. Reforms like permit to purchase. Background checks will not be enough. Sadly, Congress has been stalled on all gun violence prevention bills at this point in time because of the Senate. It's deadlocked at 50 Democrats and 50 Republicans. In March of this year, we were able to pass 2 background check bills out of the House of Representatives. It was H.R. 8, the Universal Background Check Bill, and then H.R. 1446, which was Jim Clyburn's bill to close the Charleston loophole. Actually, it partially closes the Charleston loophole. And that bill, we've been trying to move it in the Senate, but because of the filibuster, it's been challenging. Now, my Senator Chris Murphy introduced the bill, the Universal Background Check bill on the Senate side. So he's been working to acquire 10 Republicans to sponsor the bill, but he doesn't have a single one. And we may not even have the 50 Democrats on board, sadly. Manchin has signaled that he will not support the current bill as is. So we do need to do a lot of advocacy. So if you know anyone in West Virginia or even Arizona with cinema, we need to do a lot of work to convince them to support these important bills. We're advocating for the filibuster to end so that we can, get votes, including background check bills and assault weapons ban and et cetera, because we need so much more. So in lieu of federal legislation passing through Congress, we pushed the Biden administration very hard. Within the 100 days, nothing happened with executive action. So we pushed them. We formed a coalition called The Time Is Now with March for Our Lives, Guns Down, Brady, Community Justice Action Fund, and many survivors. and many grassroots organizations. We sent a letter to Biden administration saying you need to make gun violence a priority. So by April, he pulled together a meeting in the Rose Garden, and I was pleased to be invited to attend. And he announced that he will nominate David Shipman for ATF director. But regrettably, the NSSF, the National Shooting Sports Foundation, which is a Newtown-based gun lobby group, they fought really hard, along with NRA and many of the sportsman groups, against David Shipman, and his nomination was pulled recently. Sadly, just yesterday, an article came out in the New York Times stating that David, Shipman felt that the Biden administration didn't do enough to get him confirmed. So hopefully, there's a little rumbling that the Biden administration will nominate somebody else. So we need to stay hopeful, and we need to get engaged to try to get a leader in the ATF, because when President Biden in June announced his strategy to reduce crime, it has a lot to do with the ATF and the Department of Justice. So we need a leader at the ATF so that his executive actions and his plan to reduce crime can be fulfilled. So that's where we're at. We haven't seen a lot of progress legislatively. We have seen no progress legislatively. In fact, no gun control bill has been passed in 20 and signed into law in 27 years. So we need to push harder. We need to speak up. Every Monday, our community outreach director, Sarah Konijnik, holds a lunch and lobby session from 12 to 2 p.m. We contact Congress. We call them and schedule meetings because we need to push them really hard. We can't let them off the hook. They made campaign promises, and we need to make sure that they fulfill them. And, even the White House, right? Joe Biden put forth the strongest gun violence prevention platform in history. And we need to make sure that he uses the bully pulpit to push to Congress to do what they need to do, because we need more than the $5 billion of investment in community violence intervention programs. We need a director at the ATF. We need legislation passed. So we have to have a comprehensive strategy. And recently, we've been pushing for Joe Biden to bypass Congress and establish a federal Office of Gun Violence Prevention and appoint a director who would be 100% responsible for addressing this issue 100% of the time. We need someone dedicated. When we lost 3,000 people after 9/11, guess what? They established and created the Homeland Security, the Department of Homeland Security. They appointed within weeks Governor Tom Ridge as the first director of Homeland Security. We need that type of commitment from this White House and this Congress. So I know that's a lot, Devin, but I just want you all to know that there are opportunities to get involved, to advocate, and I can certainly add some links in the chat so that you can get involved.
Thank you so much. James, a kind of follow-up question with your work is, where do guns enter into the conversation, and how, what do you hear from the people you interact with who are at risk in terms of why they're buying guns and basically the sort of culture around guns there?
So it's interesting. You said, why do you buy guns, right? The question really is for them is why wouldn't I? See,
so why wouldn't they?
That's that. No, I'm saying that the logical question is, why would you, right? But for them, it's not logical. The logical question for them is, why wouldn't I? Very early on, I just remember being taught young, like if you ever have the opportunity to buy a gun, you never pass up that opportunity. Because in the streets, the gun you don't buy is probably it may be the same gun that's going to kill you, right? So you have to remember, it's a mentality, it's a culture, it's a way of life, right? And so it's almost as if we make a conscious decision whether or not we would walk out the house wearing certain things or doing certain things, right? I know that when I wear pants that are too big for me, I need to put a belt on and make sure that my pants are up on my waist, right? Because it's the right thing to do, not to have them sagging below your butt and, you know, all that. So we understand that, right? But for them, the conscious decision is, hey, which gun, do I need to take the big gun or the little gun today? I'm not sure where how do I need to wear my big sweatshirt or my small sweatshirt? It's 90 degrees outside. You walk outside and watch how many kids wearing sweatshirts and long sleeve stuff, and that's not because they cold or chilly. It's because they concealing something underneath of that. You know, and it goes by a lot of people. I don't understand, but it goes over a lot of people's heads where they just don't even think about it. You see the kid walking down the street in the middle of the summer with sweatshirts on. You know, it's because they got something underneath of it, right? And so the challenge for us is really to explain to them that why you shouldn't, right? Because like I said, even I would be interested to see the statistic about how many kids who get killed have guns on them, right? How many kids who actually get murdered actually have a gun on them? Because I know from personal experience and talking to my kids and dealing with the situations that we deal with, that a lot of these kids carry guns and don't even know how to use them. Are too scared to pull them. Don't even know, you know, one of my young people was so devastated because he watched his best friend get murdered. And he said, Mr. JT, I had the gun on me and I couldn't do nothing. I froze. Well, yeah, because you don't understand that that's normal behavior, right? You're not ingrained to be the killer that you think you are. You thought that gun was going to give you some extra power and extra this, that, and the third that it didn't give you. It didn't give you the strength or the courage to actually pull it and to pull the gun out and pull the trigger when you saw the guy with the gun long before your friend got shot. Right? And so then not only did he have a gun, but when his friend got murdered, the police found a gun on him. So the reality of it is that for them, we have to help them understand the reality that guns don't keep you safe. Right? Because you think you have a gun on you that is going to keep you safe. Guns don't keep you safe. The same gun you carry is probably a gun that somebody's going to use to kill you if you get into the wrong fight. You know, and so really helping them wake up around the realities of gun violence, not just from the community on the ground perspective. Like I said, we have to think about this even on the front line. We have to think about how do we support Poe and how do we support Dr. Cass, and how do we support the work that they do so that these guns don't reach the streets and get into the hands of our young people, because they do the work that we just don't have the time to do. I don't have the time to be a lobbyist and worry about what policies, but I need to know that information, and I need to know when it's critical for us to step in and put our voices in that fight, because our young people have a false perception about the reality of guns and the role that guns play in their lives. So we have to be able to be vocal about that and challenge them on that, and, you know, and understand it. And the scary part about it is that most of them have better guns than I probably could go afford in the gun store. I probably couldn't afford that gun if I went to buy it fresh off the rack. And they got gold plated, nickel plated, silver back, that they got all these types of crazy guns. And I'm like, where y'all getting these from? You know what I mean? And so that's the puzzling piece. The puzzling piece is how the heck are they getting the lethality rate is so high, because the firepower is much stronger. The firepower is higher. When I was growing up, you were doing something if you had a little 22. Now that's nothing. They're not worried about carrying no 22. They want to know who has the biggest 45 or the biggest 4.4. You know, so it's really about helping them understand the dynamics from the beginning to the end about how these guns affect their lives.
Thank you. So Dr. Krafasi, where do the guns come from as part one? And then shifting to kind of the questions in chat, I've noticed a bunch of questions around like the particulars of permit to purchase, and particularly around training, because I know like in my unfortunate home state of Oklahoma, like with our concealed carry law, before we went to permitless carry, we had about 10 hours, 8 of which or so were sitting in the classroom where the guy was like, oh, you kind of need to know this maybe. And then rest of it was, can you hit the broadside of a barn? And if you couldn't hit a broadside of a barn, well, okay, you pass anyway. And so kind of the training element there, and in many states, is kind of a joke. Yet logically speaking, like, we need a lot of training, not just on being able to hit the broadside of a barn, but also like how to safely store the firearm, the risk that the firearm poses, knowing all the laws and such. So how does that kind of all tie in?
Yeah, so for your first question about where the guns are coming from, it's not a simple answer, right? But they're not growing on trees. They start in a legal sale, right? With the exception of personally made firearms or sort of quote unquote ghost guns, right? They're starting in a legal sale. And we hear from all sorts of folks. JT mentioned this, that guns are being brought into places where the local sources are more constrained from these states with weaker laws and traded. We have survey data that has highlighted lots of folks who are involved in the underground gun market in Baltimore have an experience where they've accepted guns for drugs. They've even gone the other way too. If somebody had drugs and, you know, and they had a gun, they would swap it that way also. But we also know from surveys of people who are in prison for committing a crime with a firearm that a lot of them are getting them from friends and family members. As much as 40% of people who are arrested for crimes with guns, they're getting it basically through a straw purchase. They're prohibited and somebody sells it to them anyway or buys one on their behalf. So it's not just one source, but we do know that when you raise the standards for accountability and make sure that everyone is undergoing a background check, regardless of from whom they're buying a gun, it makes it harder to get guns, at least in that state, right? We're still at the mercy of states with weaker laws, but at least we can sort of do a better job. Everyone talks about Chicago, right? All the guns and crime and murder in Chicago. But if you look at crime gun trace data in Chicago, only half the guns originate in Illinois. They're coming from Indiana, they're coming from Ohio, Kentucky, these other places. So yes, we need to be focused at state level to make sure that we're strengthening where we live. We want to have stronger laws, but we really need a concerted effort, going back to what Poe was talking about, to make sure that we raise the floor for everybody, right? Because federal law sets the floor. So let's raise that floor so that we can make everybody a little bit safer. To the question about the elements of permit to purchase. So I saw a little bit of this in the chat. Every state is different. There's sort of no one gold standard in terms of comparison across states. But I will say, when we are asked what we think is a really effective law, we tend to lift up Connecticut. So their permit is good for 5 years. They do require a point of sale background check in conjunction with that license to make sure that since you got the license, it hasn't expired or been revoked. There is a training requirement. And so when we think about sort of the core pieces of a model legislation, for example, a background check that's facilitated by fingerprinting, right? If you're gonna get an occupational license, most of those require fingerprinting because it's too easy to miss a prohibiting condition. So we should take the same standard for background checks for firearms. Training that involves actually demonstrating safe handling. Once is not enough. I saw this in the chat also, right? If you don't regularly handle a firearm, it's not like riding a bike. Your muscle memory doesn't just automatically kick in. It's something that requires more effort, more consistent use. So regular training is important. And then ensuring that that point of sale background check happens at the time of sale also.
Thank you. And one thing I'd add as well to the, like, where guns come from is, I mean, there does tend to be kind of a sense that guns magically appear and it's like, oh, now you have illegal guns everywhere. But aside from ghost guns, which is a growing problem, like every single gun originated from a legal source in the US with a couple minor exceptions. And so it's either they're getting them directly from the gun store or they're being stolen from otherwise law-abiding gun owners. And then they enter the vast gray market where they're being sold over and over again until they end up at a crime scene. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's anywhere from 200 to 400,000 firearms are stolen annually. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Dr.
there are.
Kapowski?
Yeah, there are a lot of stolen firearms, but I think sort of bad apple gun dealers are a huge problem. We've, because of a lack of good directorship, sort of consistent appointed director in the ATF, gutting the ATF's budget, we have an agency that maybe you're lucky if your gun shop is inspected once every 11 years. But lots of gun shops go a really, really long time with never being inspected. So they can make, they can just engage in willfully poor sales practices over and over and over again and never be held accountable, which is alarming because we know from prior work, less than 5% of gun dealers in the US were selling more than half of guns that were recovered in crime. Clearly, there's a strong indicator that these folks are engaging in irresponsible practices. But it also is sort of individual gun owner behaviors. We know from working with the Baltimore Police Department, people go to a gun shop or buy guns from a gun show in Tennessee. They'll buy a ton of them and drive them up to Baltimore because they know there's demand, and they sell them out of the back of their trunk. And so it's not just one thing. We need to be really focused on where all these guns are coming from these different pieces. But going back to JT's point, we need to focus on healing these individuals and these communities to understand why people don't feel safe so that we can try to reduce demand as well.
Yeah. And one thing to note as well is that, and this is another conversation that I hope to have in the future, but like what we're seeing like in Baltimore and Chicago, we're doing at national scale to Mexico, where basically where all their firearms are coming from, about 70% or so of them are coming from the US. So it's not just a local, state, or national problem, it's an international problem that we're dealing with. Poe, so we've talked a lot about permit to purchase and community level programs. What are some of the other policies that are evidence-based and out there that are definitely worth advocating for? I mean, to plug my own stuff once more, the Denver Accord has an entire list of these, a bullet point list that goes for 4 pages basically of various policies. But I mean, we have stuff like extreme risk protection orders that are quite important and evidence-based, child access prevention laws with strong penalties. What else is there?
Yeah. So in addition to what Dr. Kerfazi was saying, raising the standards for gun ownership, what we need to do is reverse the damage done from 4 decades of NRA brainwashing that gun makes us safer. We have 400 million civilian owns in our nation, and it hasn't made us safer. And so the idea that a gun-free home is the safest home has to be a messaging from the gun violence prevention community. That is the messaging from the American Academy of Pediatrics. But if people choose to own guns, then they must store their guns properly. One of my very good friends, Mike and Kristen Song, they lost their 15-year-old son to an unintentional shooting when he went to his best friend's house, and the best friend's father left a gun and ammunition unsecured in a shoebox in a closet or under the bed. So guns do not make us safer. We need to convince the 400 million guns to be stored properly, for the gun owners. And also we can start engaging in community activities like gun buybacks. On October 16th, we're working with Kristen Song, who lost her son in Guilford, Connecticut to that unsafe storage issue. And we're pulling together a Connecticut statewide gun buyback and gun safe giveaway day. And we're working with local churches, we're working with police departments, hospitals, community violence intervention programs, and other gun violence prevention groups. And we're pulling together, we built a coalition, and we'll hold that day, gun buyback and gun safe giveaway day, and we hope to take some guns off the streets. In addition, we need to make sure that there is funding for research and that good data is available for us to use. Biden's budget currently will double that type of funding for research. So hopefully that budget will pass. And also we need to look into whether or not we can use the court system to take down the NRA and take down bad actors in the gun industry. So there are a lot of opportunities outside of the major gun violence prevention legislation.
Thank you. So we have about 10 or so minutes left. And as you can probably tell, this is a conversation that I'd gladly have for 4 to 5 hours rather than just one, but I won't do that to our panelists. One question or a few questions we received, and I kind of want to tie it into something I'm curious about, is the guns don't make you safer messaging, because that's something that I'm very concerned with, and Poe is as well, and like it's one of our main messaging. And now I approach that from the academic side, so debunking the myth about widespread defensive guns, debunking more guns, less crime, going into why gun shooters do not target gun-free zones, why gun laws work. But I also recognize that that sort of messaging, which you can find more on our YouTube page at GVPedia Explains, that's really not a one-on-one type conversation with somebody who's not either involved in the gun violence discussion or somebody at the street level, where, like, if I were to name drop Gary Kleck and John Lott, I highly doubt more than 2 people in Baltimore have heard either of those names in their entire existence. It would not be terribly relevant. So, James, my kind of question is, like, how do you communicate that guns don't make you safer? And where does the academic side tie into your work?
I mean, again, we deal with it's kind of tough. We have to approach the work and who we deal with from a very realistic standpoint, right? And you have to be careful. You have to pick and choose your times. You have to have relationships that are strong enough to be able to challenge them on some of these things that they think are gospel. It's hard for me to tell. So just say, for instance, I told the young man, don't carry his gun out the house today. And he goes out and gets shot. Well, he's going to blame me for that because, yo, you told me don't carry my gun, right? So I've lost all credibility, all trust, everything with him, because in his mind, he thinks that in his mind, he probably gonna think I set him up. Oh, he told me don't carry the gun today, so he probably set me up because I got shot. So the irrational thinking really starts to kick in at a high level, right? Because now you've been victimized and you're traumatized all over again. So you find anything to blame on, right? So what we have to do is, through our behavior change model, through the CBT, we continually to work with them to show them how making different decisions are better than others. So, for instance, we had a situation happen where a young man was sitting in the park with his girlfriend. He saw one of his enemies walking across the street. He called his homeboy and told him to bring the gun, the book bag, basically. The book bag has the gun, the mask, the gloves, and everything he needed in to commit the homicide. So his homeboy like, okay, I'm on my way. So by the time he got there, one of the lessons that we teach them is that it's called flex your thinking. And flex your thinking, the goal behind flex your thinking is that everything that you see is not always as it appears, right? So you need to learn to flex your thinking around each situation and understand the dynamics. Is the way that I'm thinking helpful? Number one. And then is it truthful? So what happened was the guy came with the book bag and he said, you know what? I don't even need it no more. He said, why? He said, because he kept walking. He said, I started thinking, man, he probably didn't even see me. So why am I going to go try to kill him and he didn't even see me? And then he said, number two, he was looking over here, but I don't even know if he was looking in my direction because he didn't even budge or didn't even bat an eye. He kept going. And then he said the third thing, he said, man, plus my girl here with me. Bro, I don't want to have to go kill nobody in front of my girl. Right? As crazy as those three reasons were, or the last one at least, I don't want to kill her. Crazy as that is, it was a change in his thinking that caused him to do something different. And it's because we have been having a conversation with him about flexing the way that you think about everything, right? And so what he immediately did was called his youth worker and said, man, look, I need to come talk to you because I almost killed somebody just now and I need to explain the whole situation. So the youth worker went and had the conversation, came and had the conversation with him. But the beauty of it is that 2 lives were spared that day. The young person who he probably was going after and his. And maybe more, because his girlfriend, his friend, all of them could have been implicated in that. So a lot of lives were saved that day simply because he took the time to flex the way that he thought about the situation. So again, it's about us learning. We have to teach young people why guns don't make them safe, right? It's not so much as me going and telling them, don't carry a gun. It's let me tell you why guns don't make you safe. Now, what I will boldly say to them is you're not carrying no gun with me. Now, if you got a gun, boy, you better go leave that somewhere. Nah, you can't bring that with me. So whenever you get in the car with me, we guns free. And you have to trust me enough to know that I'm gonna keep you safe and that we're gonna be safe in what we do. And they give us that respect because they know that we're gonna check them. We're gonna challenge them on it. Like I'm not just gonna take your word for it. If I know you carry a gun, boy, you lift that shirt up, spin around for me, pull them pants legs up, let me check your hat. Let me check every place I know that you possibly could be hiding it because you're not gonna carry it when you're with me, right? And so now we have developed a relationship where they don't feel the need to carry it when they're with us, but that's just with us because we've created that safety net. So how do we create that same type of safety net community-wide where they don't feel the need to carry it even as they go back into the community? And that's what it's really about. It's really about making communities safer. I think Dr. Cass said it, where the demand for the gun is not there. When I was growing up, we used to fist fight. You get beat up and you live to fight another day. Now it's not that. It's let me pull this gun and shoot your head off real quick because I don't know that you're not going to come back and do it to me. So the safer we create, the safer environment we create for our young people and our communities, the better off it is. But at the same time, all these other pieces need to be happening behind the scenes simultaneously. The policy changes, the reform changes, all these things need to be happening to help us continue to fight the battle on the street because we get lost in the sauce when that guy comes and pops his trunk and they have their pick of a billion different guns, high grade, low grade, big, small, in between. And I'm like, it's puzzling for me. And I've been out there and I just never seen access to guns the way that I see it these days for anybody. You didn't sell guns to kids when I was growing up. A kid could not come buy a gun off you. That's not the way it works now. Kids can buy guns from anybody who has them. You know what I mean? So when you get access to a gun at that young age, 10, 11, 12, you're already uneducated about it. You think that is what you see on TV. Somebody get shot and they live. South Park, can he get killed every episode, but can he still live, right? Well, it doesn't work like that in real life when it comes to guns. That person is not going to be able to return. Lastly, real quick, I had a kid who stabbed a kid to death in school probably about 4 or 5 years ago, right? And what the conversation that I had with that kid after the time of his arrest was just so unreal. Now, he was one of the most gangster, toughest kids in that school because he was forced to be that way. He was being bullied and bullied and bullied, and he finally decided that he had enough. And one day he stabbed the boy. And it was so violent that people just demonized him immediately. But what they didn't understand was the trauma that he had been going through for years of being bullied. And so that's what made the attack so violent. If you know about violence and attackers, the more personal it is, the more violent it tends to be. But the conversation I had with this kid afterwards, he just turned into a kid. He said, I want to go home. I want to see my mother. Am I going to be in jail? Am I going to jail? I have to stay here? I have to, all these different things that he just didn't understand about the law because he was conditioned to do what he did. He was conditioned to react that way. And I just think about if he had an opportunity for intervention or opportunity for behavior change, if I knew what I knew now, when I was dealing with him back then, I feel like it could have been a difference in whether his life was saved or not. Right? And so now that kid is dead because he had to answer for what he did, stabbing that boy to death. And as a result of that, he became a victim of gun violence later down the road. So it is this heartbreaking, heart-wrenching, perpetual cycle that happens over and over and over again. And the only way we stop it is by making communities safer so children can feel safer and they can devalue guns. They can devalue violence. They can devalue all these myths and all these lies that they're constantly told each and every day.
Thank you so much. And I think we'll end it there. I'd like to thank all our panelists for being here. This was an excellent conversation. And I hope everybody who joined us can see that this is really just the beginning of the conversation, that there's so much more in how everything intertwines and intersects. So thank you so much. And we will be sending out an email to everybody with further information about how you can find each of our panelists' work and our own work. Thank you so much.